Ice cold beer. Reaction of the U.S. president. Let's bring in our guest now on our special panel to analyze these Super Tuesday results and what happens going forward. Joining us, Adolfo Franco, a Republican strategist and was an advisor to Senator John McCain. He's live from Washington, D.C. LaFonza Butler is a former senior advisor to Kamala Harris for the People. She's live from Los Angeles. And also in Washington, D.C., Jennifer Victor, who's a professor of political science at George Mason University. Thank you all for being with us on Al Jazeera on this special evening for the Democrats. A spectacular night for Joe Biden, no doubt. LaFonza, is this thing, what's happening here? Do you think it's people finally discovering Joe Biden, or more a case of them being more worried about Bernie Sanders?
It's definitely not that people are finally discovering Joe Biden. He's a candidate who's been vice president for 8 years, probably 100% name ID. So there are no new discoveries here. I think it is probably some combination of the disagreement with some of Senator Sanders' policies and not believing that his policies and positions are going to help the Democrats win up and down the ticket, and a desire to really try to bring the party together in preparation for November or post-convention, where the party really is going to be having to face Donald Trump and to unite the country. And so it's not because Joe Biden is new. I think, folks, this has been a long process. I think a lot of Democrats are ready to unite behind a candidate and focus on the general election. And I think that's where the energy is really coming from.
Yeah, and unity, Jennifer, is going to be the key issue now for the Democrats, isn't it? I mean, Bernie Sanders voters didn't show up for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And people who are enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders and who may feel that he's been derailed here, will they turn to Joe Biden? Does Joe Biden have the capacity to win over those young Bernie Sanders voters?
Well, that is, of course, going to be the key question. If Biden does wind up being the nominee, you know, one thing I want to put a slight note of caution on here is there's a tendency after any particular contest is finished for the narrative to all of a sudden be about that candidate, whoever has surged that particular evening. And so tonight and going into the next few days, that story's all going to be about Joe Biden and this Joe Biden momentum. But as we've seen over the last just few days, those narratives and those sense of momentum can change very quickly. And there's still a fair number of delegates that are on the table. So while this is looking like a Biden race, and Biden's going to have this big challenge of figuring out how to woo over some of those Sanders voters, it's not quite over yet.
Right. It is not quite over yet. You're very right to point that out. It's still a long way till the convention and till the election. Adolfo Franco, your thoughts here, and I want to ask you specifically about the president's strategy. We saw his tweets there about Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg. When it comes to Biden and Sanders, how aggressive a campaign do we expect the president to put on? I mean, which of these two candidates would he rather run against?
Well, I think the president's going to put on a very aggressive campaign. There's just no question about it. We can talk about the fact that the ground game of the Republicans during this period of time have been building up a large infrastructure throughout the country. The president has raised unprecedented amounts of money for his campaign. So the Republican Party and the president is in the best situation possible. No opposition, united Republican Party, 94% of Republicans support President Trump, and we don't have, frankly, I will call it the civil war that's going on in the Democratic Party, for the soul of the Democratic Party anyway. So the president's strategy is going to be to run on his record. There's no question about that. But the economy is going to be central. Trade agreements, immigration, the things that the president promised that he would do. And secondly, I think he's going to go against both candidates very aggressively on the idea of more taxes, big government, particularly if it's the Sanders position of, frankly, a role for government that's anathema to most Americans. And I think that's going to be the distinction. One really, frankly, of capitalism that has generated the lowest unemployment for African Americans, for Hispanics, in the history of our country under President Trump's watch, and record low unemployment almost for all Americans, versus a sharp turn to the left, which I think most Americans reject. And I frankly think a lot of what we call blue collar working Democrats and the Rust Belt states that are going to be key for the electoral victory for either candidate in November are going to favor President Trump. I think he's going to go after those issues most particularly.
All right, we'll still have some time to go before we find out. Thank you all for talking to us, Adolfo Franco, Jennifer Victor, and Lafonso Butler. Thank you.